Hello, BookTube. I want to make a kind of response video to a great video that Michael K Vaughan made earlier today. I'll leave a link to his video down below. His video is in the way of drumming up yet more interest, as if more were needed, from an inaugural BookTube event that is starting just today, June on the Range, which is Michael's own event, in which we celebrate the Western genre for the whole month of June. A lot of people have been emailing me with enthusiastic interest in this event. And Michael today did a video on his favorite Westerns, his 10 favorite Westerns, which, automatically made me think about a starter kit for Westerns or my own version of my 10 favorite Westerns. And I thought I would do a kind of a combination of that because the starter kit for Westerns, in my case, would pretty much be, with a couple of variables that could be swapped out, also my favorites. So I've got the notes on the iPad here. The problem here is that you'll have to extend me a little vote of sympathy for is the ergonomic challenge. I have my notes right here. I have the pictures of the book on my phone, which is going to have to go up here, but I also can't block the bean because she's really wiped out with the heat, and she's being adorable. I know you would all get mad if I blocked that face, so I'm going to try to do all three of those things. Michael, in his video is fantastic. He mentions a whole bunch of big name Western authors, quite a few of whom are not big names outside of Westerns. Including names that I have sold. I have handled their books a million times. I've handed them to customers, found them for customers, but never read them. The very first one on his list is Elmer Kelton, who was a huge name in Westerns. And it's one thing to see that in a Western section in a bookstore. It's one thing to, find that for a customer or unpack that from a new release box. But it's different when someone, on BookTube is praising this thing. So now, all of a sudden, I'm wondering how many of Michael's picks for his top 10 favorites will nudge out other things that I intend to read in the month of June. I'm going to saturate myself in Westerns. I have a ton of them to read through. But I don't, at the moment, have any Elmer Kelton, as far as I know, and I should probably give that a try. Same thing with his next one, Will Henry, who, by his description, is an institution in the Western world. I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, I have never read a Will Henry Western, but it changes the logistics of the whole thing if someone that you watch all the time, someone whose literary judgments you like, says that they've read the author and liked it. Same thing with the next one, Roy Hogan, on his list. He rattled off a whole bunch of authors I've never read, and I find that fascinating. Just fascinating. That's one of the reasons I do read-along events like this. I just need to find some Westerns by these authors. The next one, Nelson Nye, is the only one of these kinds of authors on his list that I'm actually familiar with, and not from his Westerns. He was a book reviewer. The only book reviewer with any kind of real substantial clip file anywhere on his list or mine. That is always of interest. He also mentions Richard Matheson, who will be famous for I Am Legend, his weird quasi-vampire novel that's been filmed. But he did write Westerns, and I have a few of those. One of which, is it The Year of the Guns? Something like that. I read a long time ago. I found a battered paperback of it when I was on vacation. But it left no memory at all, and I'm curious to know. I'm in a very small minority of people who do not like I Am Legend, and I'm wondering. I know that Matheson got into a period where he was writing Westerns. Maybe they spoke to him. Maybe I should revisit them. Not only the one that Michael mentions, but also others. Michael also in his video mentions Zane Grey, who's another hugely prolific Western author who has a few really famous books to his credit. And Michael brings up an issue in connection with Zane Grey that we're going to have to talk about a little during June on the Range. Michael brings it up in the perfect way, which is that some of these authors are guilty of what I would call lazy racism and also lazy sexism. Not the active kind of either one of those, but where you're going to notice it. You're going to bark your shin against caricatures of races, against women in very sexist, women obviously written by men. And as Michael points out in his video, it's probably a good thing overall. I don't think there's any probably about it, that we have slowly pulled by chains advance our collective consciousness enough so that those moments will grate. Our grandfathers read those passages without batting an eye. Now, they will grate. Nevertheless, as Michael says himself, and I was cheering when I heard him do it, Zane Grey is still a great Western author. The only contingent of readers who see that sort of stuff in a book and angrily dismiss not only the book, but condemn anyone who reads it, the only people who do that are people who read like children. It is entirely possible, if the author brings other skills to the table, it's entirely possible to overlook a few things like that. If you say that it's not, then you are requiring every author going back 7,000 years to share the morality that you have at this moment, most of which you learned from Twitter. That's not a very good standard. So I'm glad that came up, because we're going to have to talk about that in the future during June on the Range. June on the Range, don't get me wrong, is a very fun event. It's taking its cue from its inventor. This is going to be a fun, worry-free event. We are reading Westerns to enjoy them. But questions of what I would call lazy racism are going to come up, especially in connection with American Indians, with Native Americans. There's no way to avoid that, except in very, very rare instances, one of which I will be talking about in this video. But he goes on to mention Luke Short, the author Luke Short, who, as far as I know, is the only author on his list or mine, because of course I have a complimentary list. I think Luke Short is the only author on either list who actually experienced the Old West personally before it disappeared. I don't know that lends his books any greater authenticity. That's another thing that we can talk about. Why are we going to these books? And are we penalizing them for a lack of authenticity? Is this, like, for instance, Tudor historical fiction? The immediate impulse of 90% of the people who read Tudor historical fiction or ancient Rome historical fiction is to immediately start toting up all the little details the author gets wrong in their research. I don't know if I've ever encountered anyone who does that with Westerns, which are historical fiction. So we'll have to talk about that as well. But he also mentions Wayne Overholser, who's another Western author who Michael praises him. I've heard other people praise him. I've never, to the best of my knowledge, read him. And he also mentions Louis L'Amour, of course, is the name that is synonymous with Western, with the Western genre. And another person that we're going to have to grapple with the first week of June on the Range for me is going to be all Louis L'Amour. And I've started ahead a little bit, and I'm deep into a few books of his, and I want to understand, if I can, just what it is that he's doing. What it is, Michael refers to him as not only one of the most popular authors in American history, but perhaps one of the most popular authors in world history. And I don't think that's an exaggeration, and I want to know why. I want to know why that is. So he comes up, but believe it or not, Louis L'Amour is not Michael's first pick. His number one pick is T.V. Olson, another Western author from whom I have read, I don't think, anything. So it was great to read a list like that, a top 10 list that actually had a lot of material for me to think about. That was great. But I have a top 10 list of my own that I want to show you. And we're just going to have to work this out. I don't want you to miss the Bean's face, because she's sound asleep. She absolutely resists being babied or coddled when it gets over 85, but nevertheless hits her like a freight train. She all her life, she's prone to overheating and gets just languid when it gets hot. And it is a little warm today. Boston is going to face a lot worse. A lot worse. This is one of those days where it gets right to the doorstep of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, but the minute the sun goes down, you're guaranteed a gorgeous evening. Just gorgeously comfortable. I can only imagine, if the day is like this here, I can only imagine how beautiful the upper porch is going to be at the old house in Vermont with Mark Mitchison out there on his chair. I can only imagine how nice that will be, looking over the woods, listening to the river in the background. But I made a list of my own. It is not meant to compete with Michael K. Vaughan's list. June on the Range has no animosity of any kind, unlike the animosity that is slowly but steadily building behind the scenes in Garb August. I think the trash in August, garbage in August, is going to be, what do the kids say? a dumpster fire or an event, quite appropriately. But there's none of that here. June on the Range is just a fun event. So I made a list. I want to make sure that I have my notes, but I also want to show you pictures. So we will start with this, which is one of, I think, 3 Pulitzer Prize winning books on my list. None of the books, I don't think, on Michael's list won any Pulitzer Prizes. You would have to get the Pulitzer Committee pretty darn drunk for them to think about Louis L'Amour. But this one is the first one. This is by Oliver Lafarge, and it is Laughing Boy. I don't want to block the beam. See the challenges I have to go through here? I don't want to, here, if I lay this down and hold this up like that, will that work any better? Yeah, that works better. You can still see her darling face. And this is one of the books that I mentioned in my opening here that treats Native Americans with a lot more three-dimensionality. That's what this book is entirely about. So you get a lot more three-dimensionality with them than you usually do. Then the next one on my list, I tried. Once upon a time, I think it was Bantam, did a beautiful paperback of this book with a beautiful cover. And I looked around for it. I'm probably not as good at that as a lot of the rest of you. This is not that cover. I think I have that paperback. This is Oakley Hall's book, Warlock. Tremendously effective. We're going to have to talk during the month of June. We will talk about what makes some of these things effective. There are tons and tons, I would say millions, of little 130-page romance novels that are nothing. They are nothing at all. They are the literary equivalent of empty calories. But then there are some like this that have a kind of Old Testament brimstone to them, and characters speaking in a kind of, leather and holsters eloquence that very much foreshadows Deadwood. It's going to be a pleasure to dig into some of these books. I don't know how many of the books on my list I am actually going to reread. I might reread Warlock if I can find that beautiful antique old Bantam paperback. You would recognize the paperback that I'm talking about in a heartbeat, those of you who are of a certain vintage. I would never get this. Book 1 on the cover, a boring cover like that, never in a million years. Then this next one is by Lauren Esselman, who did a lot of period 1920s cop novels that I cannot recommend strongly. I cannot recommend Lauren Esselman just in general strong enough. He's steadily working, is never broken out, but boy is he good. And this is one of the best books he ever did. I've praised it on this channel before. It's Bloody Season, which is his Gunfight at OK Corral novel. Not the only Gunfight at OK Corral novel on this list. Actually, Warlock is very much a Gunfight at OK Corral novel, but this is explicitly that, with the Earps and the Clantons and the cowboys and whatnot, and only told with an amazing amount of texture. Boy, oh boy, what a book. And we'll just go on, since we're on the subject, we'll just go on to the next one. This is Mary Doria Russell, another thing that Michael could have brought up in his video, another consideration that we're just going to have to all agree to be adult enough to just deal with, without anybody climbing up on their soapbox or getting offended. And so far, all the co-hosts and everybody that has contacted me about this event has no problem with that. We are really lucky. I know I say this all the time. We are really lucky in this little corner of BookTube that we're all friends and we're all kind of adult about this sort of thing. But the element I'm talking about, of course, is that virtually no Westerns are written by women. And women very, very famously, infamously, tend to fulfill only one of 2 or 3 roles. They're either pure as the driven snow or they're harlots or whatnot, hardly ever anything else. And this is a book written by a woman that it is fantastic. I reviewed it, I think, for the Washington Post. I praised it to the skies. I don't know if I'm on the paperback. My blurb may be on the paperback. This is Epitaph by Mary Doria Russell. And this is also a Gunfight at OK Corral novel. Only unlike Esselman's, it has a blood and thunder kind of muscle and blood to it. And this is far more poetic. Beautiful, harsh, but really, really probably some of the best writing on this list, with only 1 or 2 very notable exceptions. The next one being one of those exceptions is Charles Portis's novel True Grit, which was made into one of the greatest Western movies of all time, which is another thing we're going to have to talk about on June at the Range, which is Westerns in pop culture, on TV, in serials, in movies, maybe even in comic books. I don't want to think about it, but of course, for our other shared event, Michael K Vaughan and I do Epic Comic Book Wednesday, and Unlike all other events that I'm involved in, he's in charge of that. He could easily pick Two Gun Kid. He probably has a 1,000-page omnibus. But anyway, if you know this from the movie, you know what this is about. A little girl decides to hire the biggest, meanest gunfighter she can find to avenge the death of her father, to bring in the man who killed her father. It's terrifically good. It's again one of the few books on this list that I think has staying literary power. Then this next one, this was close. This 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 won a Pulitzer. This is another book that won the Pulitzer. Actually, did I mention Laughing Boy won the Pulitzer? This won the Pulitzer too. It's not the book that you would ordinarily think of for this author, but it did have. This is the Bantam cover, the same artist, same outline, same design as the cover for Warlock that I couldn't find. And this is The Way West by Guthrie, by A.B. Guthrie. And you would be thinking, if you know anything about this author, you might be thinking that I would pick The Big Sky of his instead. And it's a dead heat. I myself like this one a little better, mainly because of another staple of Western literature, which is a Cable and Ain and a Cain and Abel type dialectic between two male characters. I mean, there is a bigger plot in this book, but there's a ferociously powerful strand that's just two men dealing with each other, and that comes up a lot in westerns, and that's the reason that I picked this one. Then we have this is another near-run thing. This is an author who's known for his crime fiction, but he also wrote westerns, and like Lauren Esselman, his westerns are really, really good. That author is Elmore Leonard, and this is his novel Last Stand on Sabre River. This is an old period cover that mucks around with the title, but it was the most colorful one I could find. And it's fantastic. Elmore Leonard's westerns are never long, and they are terrific. Probably the natural choice here, if the natural choice for Guthrie was The Big Sky and I didn't do it, the natural choice for this author would probably be Valdez is Coming. Or maybe 3:10 to Yuma. But that I picked this one instead because this one is a stereotypical, an archetypal example of what I mentioned. Two really strong men dealing with each other. There is a plot, but it boils down to that in the end, and I find that fascinating. That theme runs through a lot of the books that we're talking about here, including the last one. The next one is a favorite. It certainly came up quite a bit during David Murphy's recent visit. This is Glenn Thwarthout's book, The Shootist. This is the movie cover. This was John Wayne's last movie. And you've got the little cameos of all the other actors and actresses in there. I picked this cover to show you. I love this book, which is different in some ways from The Shootist as a movie. Lays on the syrup of sentiment a lot more heavily than Swarthout ever did. Glenn Swarthout was not a sentimental author. I picked this cover to show you because I love the movie. Really, really love the movie. It will come up when we talk about Western movies. But this is about J.B. Brooks, who was a legendary gunfighter, but this is very much at the end of the era of Westerns, which is another thing that we're going to have to talk about. What is the time period of a Western? This is very much at the end. Famously, during the course of this little novel, J.B. Brooks is trying to, after a very busy life full of killing people, he is finally trying to sit down and read a newspaper from front to back. And the main article of news in the paper is the death of Queen Victoria, which puts this thing firmly in the 20th century. There's an electric trolley car in town. There are telephones in houses. So this is probably the latest in time of any book that I have on this list, but I cannot recommend it strongly enough. Actually, Glenn Swarthout, just in general, is worth your time. Very much worth your time. Then we have the aforementioned Zane Grey. This is his masterpiece, Riders of the Purple Sage, which I think is even... I found this cover because it's nice and dorky and colorful, but I think Riders of the Purple Sage is a Penguin classic. I'm pretty sure that it is. I don't have it in my notes, but I'm pretty sure that I've seen this as a Penguin. I don't have it as a Penguin classic, but I don't think this is another example. This is my favorite / starter kit, but I don't think I'll be rereading a lot of these books. I won't, for instance, be rereading The Shootist, and there are a bunch of other things on here. I don't think I'll reread Last Stand at Sabre River. I'm pretty sure that when it comes to Elmore Leonard, I will reread short stories. He has a big, fat collection of short stories that I cannot recommend strongly enough. I'll probably make my way through that. And I won't be rereading Riders of the Purple Sage. I might pick up another Zane Grey. But I won't be rereading this one, but I cannot recommend it strongly enough. And then we get to number one on my list, which is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This also won the Pulitzer Prize, so I think I have 3 Pulitzer winners. Is that right? Laughing Boy is on my list. The Way West is on my, The Way West, and then Lonesome Dove won the Pulitzer. And I believe will be the last traditional Western to win the Pulitzer or any other literary prize. This is sort of the swan song of the genre, that is, when it's done unironically, when it's not a pastiche or a send-up of some kind. And this is epic. It's huge. It's you could fit 2 or 3 of most of the other books I listed in here. And it also, to follow the thread that's going throughout here, it also deals in large part, I mean, there are other plots going on, but it deals in large part with the relationship between 2 men, 2 major characters. That is the part of the book that you will remember the most. That's the part of the book that you will, when you think back, that's what you'll see in your mind. There's a lot else going on in this novel, and will be Michael K. Vaughan, I think, mentioned that he will be reading this for I think the first time for June on the Range. And Matthew at Mayberry Book Club and I will be doing a month-long read-along of Lonesome Dove, 200 pages every week. A lot of you have expressed interest in that. A lot of you have had this book staring at you from your shelves, making you feel guilty. About time to get that over with. You'll never find a better occasion to do that than June on the Range, which is all about celebrating Westerns. So there you go. That is a little list. I would say the ergonomics worked out okay. You still got to see your full share of the bean. That is a little list. I don't know what I will actually call it. It is kind of my favorites. But it would also work really well as a starter kit. I don't think there are many people who would deny many of these books a place on any list of the best Westerns ever written. It just so happens that I also really love them. They are also really favorites of mine, although that could change. I have a feeling that a lot of you have read more Westerns than I have. Certainly, I know for sure from the emails that I've been getting about June on the Range. I think Michael struck gold with this event, which is always great when it's your first one and it just strikes gold. But I've been getting the impression from a lot of you sending me emails that whether or not I've read more Westerns than you have, they mean more to you than they do to me. I've lost count of, well, a lot of you will know because you've sent me those emails. I've lost count of how many emails I've got of people saying, I can't wait for June on the Range. My grandfather had a wall of Westerns. Or seeing people hold up those Western covers really choked me up. It reminded me of my grandfather or my great uncle or even my father. So there's an emotional element here. There's a sentimental element here that I definitely do not have when it comes to Westerns. So that'll be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see that play out. But I wanted to make this list. I wanted to give you visuals of both the books and the bean. And I will post this and with a link to Michael's video, and I can't wait to see what other people do. I actually hope that every host for June on the Range decides to make a list of their favorite Westerns and just put a bunch of book titles out there and talk about them. I would love to see that. The more suggestions, the merrier. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now and tend to my heat-soaked little bean. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.